So hi again, everyone. Thanks for the wonderful introductions. It's great to have people that have been involved with this important program for so long. Thanks for being here for the Pinniped Monitoring Program volunteer training. I'm Justin Lindenberg of Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods. We partner with California State Parks on many volunteer programs and stewardship projects. And we also partner with Sonoma Water, who we're very grateful to have with us here today to share more about the task at hand with Pinniped monitoring. So who's Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods? Stewards' mission is to protect the natural and cultural resources of Armstrong Redwoods, Austin Creek, and Sonoma Coast State Park through volunteerism, environmental education, and stewardship for generations to come. This is one of our important volunteer programs that we work in partnership with state parks and Sonoma Water on. Our vision is for a vibrant, diverse community of people, programs, and partnerships that ensure the resilience of the lands and waters sustaining all living things. We just revised our vision and mission statement, so we're glad to share that with you today. This program also specifically Pinniped Monitoring has its own vision, mission, and purpose, which I'll share with you. And then I want to do a quick preview of becoming a volunteer. So the vision for the Pinniped Monitoring Program is all species of concern, including but not limited to marine mammals, threatened and endangered salmonids, bird life, and other aquatic species will thrive together in the Russian River estuary. The mission is to collect and provide the data that will be used by the National Marine Fisheries Service to ensure that pinnipeds are safeguarded under the Marine Mammal Protection Act at the mouth of the Russian River. Maybe Kenzie and Kason want to get into a little discussion about the MMPA and the MLPA, Marine Life Protection Act, as well as they intersect at this important place that we're talking about volunteering in. The purpose of the program is by monitoring pinnipeds, we aim to determine whether or not modifications of the Russian River estuary will impact the colony. So that's really what we're checking on. If there need to be mechanical breaches and whatnot, we want to, we need to monitor the overall health of the population and understand what impacts there are. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real briefly, essentially to share with new folks how to become a volunteer with this program. And the first place you go is the Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods website, which is stewardscr.org. This is our homepage. You click on volunteer and then volunteer opportunities, which takes you to a page that has more information on becoming a volunteer. I'm going to hand my computer over kind of halfway through this training to Bette Merritt, who's our volunteer coordinator. And we invite you to come into the office and have a cup of coffee with Bette. And she can show you how to navigate this paperwork. It's only 9 pages, but there's some important steps involved. You can also complete this paperwork online. And there's a duty statement that is specific to the Pinniped Monitoring Program that needs to be signed along with the paperwork, and Hollis will send more information out to everyone that registered for the training today, along with a Zoom link for the recording after we're done here. So that's a little bit about the program. It's a little bit a brief intro on becoming a volunteer. Does anyone have questions on these two things? Otherwise, I'm gonna hand it over to our experts at Sonoma Water. All right. So with no questions, I'll hand it off to Jessica.
Okay, good morning, all. I'm going to share my screen and start the presentation. And you all are able to see my screen? Yes, great. Okay, thank you. So I'm Jessica Martini Lamb. I'm an Environmental Resources Manager and Wildlife Biologist with Sonoma Water. Thank you all for joining us and for your interest in our Pinniped Monitoring Program that we conduct in collaboration with Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods. We feel very fortunate to have such a long-standing relationship with stewards and with the many volunteers that have helped us collect this data for many years. So we appreciate your interest in helping us continue this data collection effort. I'm going to start my presentation with some background about the Russian River Estuary Management Project, and then I'll move into describing the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So Sonoma County Water Agency has been working on the estuary management project since the mid-1990s. In the mid-90s, responsibility for estuary management came from Sonoma County and was transferred over to Sonoma Water. And when we talk about estuary management, we're really discussing managing the flood risk that occurs when the river mouth periodically closes. So here you'll see a topographic map of the Russian River estuary. And the estuary is basically where the freshwater river meets the saline ocean. And these conditions mix to produce a very productive environment, very unique environment in the estuary. On the left side, you'll see the river mouth at Goat Rock State Beach. And periodically, that river mouth will close as a result of ocean waves and swells carrying sediments, offshore sediments, and depositing them onto the beach and closing the river mouth. And when that happens, the estuary actually becomes a lagoon. And continuing inflow from the Russian River, as well as wave overwash from the ocean, will result in an increase in water elevation in the lagoon that will threaten low-lying properties along Jenner all the way up to Vacation Beach with flooding. And Sonoma Water became responsible for managing and minimizing that flood risk in the mid-1990s. When the estuary is open, the tidal extent extends approximately upstream to Austin Creek. That's about 11 river kilometers upstream of the Pacific Ocean. And then when the estuary closes and becomes a lagoon, we'll see those lagoon conditions actually extend into what we call the maximum backwater area. But lagoon conditions will extend all the way up to Vacation Beach. So when the river mouth closes, Sonoma Water is monitoring conditions to determine if there's the potential for flooding. And what will happen is water surface elevations will rise. You'll see the closed condition in the top right-hand photo is an example of a closed beach when the Goat Rock State Beach. And the sort of low-level flood elevation in the lagoon, in the Russian River Lagoon, is about 9 feet. When water levels reach above 9 feet, they start to flood low-lying properties. For a point of reference, the visitor center at Jenner is the floor of the building is at about approximately 10.3 feet. And the low spot on Highway 1 in front of the gas station and post office is at about 12.3 feet. So what's been done historically is when the river mouth would close, either private citizens or the county would go out and create what's called a pilot channel and artificially breach the river mouth to allow those water levels to drop and reduce the flood risk. So Sonoma Water took on that responsibility, and when the estuary closes, we conduct what's called an artificial breach during most of the year. And this can happen any time of the year, but predominantly we'll see closures in the late spring, and then mostly in the fall and early winter months, we see significant increases in ocean swells that are strong enough to carry sediment into the river mouth. And Sonoma Water will bring equipment out to create the pilot channel and artificially breach the mouth north of the jetty groin, which is the concrete cap that you'll see out at Goat Rock State Beach if you're out on the beach. But in the mid-May to mid-October timeframe, we're actually managing for dual objectives. So we're managing both for minimizing flood risk, but also to enhance habitat for juvenile steelhead that rear in the estuary. So estuaries are really important habitats for salmonids to grow and become acclimated to saline conditions. So they'll enter the estuary as freshwater acclimated young fish and grow pretty quickly with abundant food resources that are in the estuary, and become acclimated to the marine environment before they eventually will move out into the ocean. So in that mid-May through mid-October timeframe, we're trying to minimize that flood risk, but also keep the estuary closed as long as we possibly can to make sure that that freshwater and brackish habitat that provide marine habitat for salmonids is available as long as possible. Sonoma Water's activities also include pretty extensive biological and physical monitoring in the estuary. So if you're out there, you may see our staff biologists conducting fishery surveys. We'll do summer seining sampling, as well as downstream migrant trapping of juvenile salmonids. We have been doing invertebrate monitoring for many years. We completed our studies for invertebrates in the estuary and evaluation of prey resources that are available for salmonids in the estuary back in 2019. We have our ongoing Pinniped Monitoring Program, as well as a pretty extensive water quality monitoring program that we have in the estuary. And then we do a number of studies evaluating the physical processes that drive both the beach morphology, but also the water quality habitat that is available for salmonids and other species in the estuary. So as you might imagine, most of our activities in the estuary are subject to a number of regulatory provisions, including the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And so the Marine Mammal Protection Act is a federal act that prohibits taking of marine mammals unless it's otherwise authorized under a permit. And it authorizes what's called incidental taking under otherwise lawful activities. So the act defines take and harassment. And take is defined as to harass, hunt, capture, or kill, or attempt to do any of these things to a marine mammal. And then harassment is defined as any act of pursuit or torment or annoyance that could result in an injury or disturbance of behavioral patterns of marine mammals. And Marine Mammal Protection Act permits require a description of what's called the permissible methods of take. So basically what activities are authorized under the permit. And they also require mitigation measures to ensure that the least practicable adverse impact on species in their habitat are met. And these permits also require monitoring and reporting. So Sonoma Water holds a Marine Mammal Protection Act, what's called a letter of authorization, which is a long-term multi-year permit under the Marine Mammal Protection Act for level B harassment of harbor seals, California sea lions, and elephant seals that could incidentally result from our estuary management activities. And this permit describes the minimization measures that we have to have in place, as well as our monitoring requirements and reporting requirements. And the activities that are included in their permit include all of our beach management activities, whether it's artificial breaching or the summer outlet channel management. It also covers any of the monitoring activities that our staff are conducting. So that includes if we're out on the beach measuring the inlet channel or the outlet channel measurements, the monthly beach topographic surveys that we're required to conduct under our federal and state Endangered Species Act permits, as well as all the biological and water quality monitoring our staff will be doing, either out on the beach or in the estuary proper. Those activities are all covered in the permit. So that's a brief description of our estuary management project. I'll move on to the description of the Pinniped monitoring activities, and then I'm happy to take questions. So our estuary management project has a Pinniped monitoring plan that was developed by both Sonoma Water and Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods and approved under the Marine Mammal Protection Act that really evaluates the population dynamics of the local harbor seal haulout at Goat Rock State Beach at Jenner. And it describes all of the monitoring methods for both our baseline surveys and surveys associated with monitoring our beach management actions. The monitoring methods that are described in the plan are based on the monitoring efforts that have been conducted at the Goat Rock State Beach haulout for many, many years. So most of you are probably familiar with the Stewards Seal Watch program, which is sort of the first program to monitor the harbor seals at Goat Rock State Beach. And then it follows the monitoring methods that were developed by Dr. Joe Mortensen and Eleanor Toohey back in the 1990s to monitor the harbor seal haulout. Sonoma Water began monitoring back in 1996. And the harbor seal monitoring back in the late 90s was really associated strictly with our artificial breaching program. And then we extended that program in the 2000s to incorporate both the artificial breaching monitoring and our baseline monitoring. So the goals and objectives of our monitoring program are to monitor the response of the pinnipeds at the haulout to any estuary management activities, to monitor the trends in the population size of the haulout and pup production. And we report all of these results to resource agencies and to the public. The monitoring plan describes our monitoring schedule. So the baseline surveys, which evaluate just sort of the basic condition of the harbor seal haulout, are conducted from mid-March to mid-October. And then we also conduct additional monitoring in association with any beach management action that we're undergoing on the beach. So from mid-May through mid-October, that might be implementation of a lagoon outlet channel. And the remainder of the year, it would be associated with our artificial breaching programs. Our baseline monitoring methods include monitoring the haulout from the Highway 1 overlook at just north of Jenner. Those baseline surveys are conducted twice a month from mid-March to mid-October, and they're approximately 4 hours long each survey. During the pupping season, we're conducting weekly surveys. So those are done weekly and are shared between Sonoma Water biologists and stewards volunteers. And during all of these baseline surveys, we're conducting counts of the number of seals that both adults and pups that are present on the beach. And we're also recording any disturbances to the haulout. During the beach management monitoring, we're the same requirements. Any time of year we're doing any kind of beach management activities. Before we bring equipment on the beach, within 1 to 3 days, we'll conduct what we call a pre-excavation survey. This is after the river mouth is closed, but before any beach management action is taken, there'll be a survey done of the harbor seals. And then the day of any beach management activity, we'll have monitors on site monitoring and documenting seal haul outs and the seal's reactions to the beach management activities. And then we also conduct the same survey the day following a beach management action. And the methods that are used for this monitoring are the same as baseline. We're conducting seal counts and documenting all disturbances to the haul out. Our monitoring plan also describes specific mitigation measures to make sure that we are minimizing any effects to the harbor seal haul out during the pupping season. And Andy and Michelle described this a little bit more in their coming presentations. But if there's a neonate, which is a pup that is less than a week old on the beach, in our work area, whether it's in the location where we're planning to do artificial breaching or on the access path from the parking lot to the beach, our management activities are delayed until the pup has left, or the latest possible day if flooding is imminent. And beach management activities during the pupping season can't occur on more than 2 consecutive days. It doesn't happen very often, but occasionally the barrier beach will be breached and then it'll close back up again right after, like within a day. And water surface elevations won't decline during that time frame. And it's, the flood risk still exists. So occasionally we've had to go out for a second day, but we can't do that during the pupping season. And then there's also a 7-day no work period between events. So occasionally there will be closures that'll be breached and then followed by subsequent closure like within a week. And during the pupping season, we avoid going out within that following week. And both our monitoring plan and our permit require Sonoma Water to report any abandoned pups on the beach. So again, Andy and Michelle described this more fully in their presentations, but we look for signs of abandoned pups by looking for pups that don't have any contacts with adults on the beach. They may not have moved or shown any real activity on the beach, or they'll attempt to nurse from females and their attempts will be rebuffed. If we do see abandoned pups, please do not approach the pups or attempt to move them. Our permits do actually do not allow us to handle any pinnipeds. Please instead contact Sonoma Water staff. Our contact number is on every data sheet that our observers are completing. And we report that abandoned pump to the NIMS stranding network immediately. And then we also provide reports to National Marine Fisheries Services regional and headquarters offices. And as you might imagine, there's a lot of data that gets collected from all of these monitoring efforts. So the data sheets that are collected by completed by volunteers are collected every month and entered into what is a pretty extensive database now of the Goat Rocks State Beach Harbor Seal haul out. And all of that data is evaluated for answering those questions that are described in our Pinniped Monitoring Plan. And then Andy will prepare an annual report of our data collection that's then submitted to National Marine Fisheries Service, as well as shared with state parks and stewards of the coast and redwoods and the public. So that concludes my presentations. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
I don't see any questions in the chat, Jessica. If anybody wants to unmute themselves.
I have a question.
There you go.
You mentioned the last slide there, the annual report. I was wondering if you could tell us how we're doing and if the reports are good or if there's been bad years, or just a sense of how is it going?
I'll let Andy answer that. I think she's also going to be sharing some of those results in her presentation.
Yeah, I will touch on that. And actually I'm going to switch things up a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and start with that presentation, and then I'll do the Pinniped ID after, just because it seems relevant. But yeah. Anything else before I just jump right in? I'll just kind of pick up where Jessica left off. It was a really good lead in, so we'll start with that. Let me just pull up the right presentation here. Okay, now my screen. All right. So again, my name is Andrea Petrich. I'm a senior environmental specialist with Sonoma Water, and I'm going to start this morning by talking about our Pinniped monitoring at Jenner. And so we'll start with kind of an overview of what we've learned, and I'll then kind of briefly describe what you can expect when you're doing the monitoring. And then from there, I'll go into a presentation about who we're looking at and how to identify them. So we have been collecting data here under this current plan that's been revised, but the current plan since 2009. Jessica mentioned that Sonoma Water has actually had, and then the community at large through CO Watch and Stewards of the Coast and Redwoods have actually been monitoring the population even longer than that. But it's still, quite a big data set it represents a lot of hours of people out there. And I think that's an important thing to put into context too, because that's just, opportunity for people to make observations and then report things as they come up. So that's, Jessica mentioned reporting abandoned pups. It's how we also are able to look for stranded animals or unique sightings. Even observations of carcasses can go to help further local research efforts by having samples being able to be collected through California Academy of Sciences. So that's kind of an example of how just having the presence of those people out there, volunteers and Sonoma Water staff contributes overall to kind of knowledge and health of the population for harbor seals. Oops. So we do observe seasonal patterns in harbor seal abundance. And this is our most recent year that we have summarized. So it represents data from 2022. So this is kind of when we changed the term of our baseline survey. So you'll notice that it ends in October here. But this is typical of what we see in other previous years as well, where we have abundance gradually increasing throughout the spring, peaking in the summertime, and then we see a decline in the number of seals on the beach after that peak in the summer. So this is a plot that kind of smooths out the data for 11 years. And you can see that in general, each year has that same pattern where we have kind of a moderate amount in the winter, increasing through the spring, and then a decrease in the number of seals in the fall and starting in winter. We've also, through all of this years of data, we've been able to look at different factors that influence seal abundance. So having this long-term data set and having collected many hours, we were able to determine that there are some patterns in the number of seals on the haul out, depending on time of day, and that these patterns are not the same throughout the year. So all of these dots represent the number of harbor seals on land. And then that red line in each square is just kind of like the best fit line for those dots for the number of harbor seals. And I have it grouped by season. So we do see in the spring and in the winter months that there tend to be more seals on the beach as the hours increase. And these are only daylight hours. So you have fewer seals in the morning and the haul out gradually building as the day goes on. We do not see the same pattern in the fall and in the summer. So in the fall, if you remember from the previous graph, we typically have fewer seals, and in the summer we have greater seals, or a greater number of seals. So that has to do, I believe, with what they're doing on the beach and how they're interacting in their environment during those times of the year. So in the summertime, we have newborn pups with their moms, and we also have seals that are that's during their mating season. So we have males and females kind of in the breeding areas at the same time. So they're spending more time on and near their haul out and less time out at sea. Springtime and wintertime, we see these daily fluctuations in their abundance. And based on other papers, people that have put tracking devices on seals and followed them out at sea and studied their foraging behavior, it's likely due to foraging during the day or during the night, actually. So they're coming back to shore as the day begins, resting, and then likely leaving the haul out. And that's why they're not present there earlier in the morning. So we don't track these harbor seals, but that's my best guess at why we see these patterns. So during spring and winter, they're using these haul outs as resting between foraging events. In the fall, they're likely spending more time at sea, and they don't have to return every day to rest. They can actually spend multiple days at sea foraging. They forage in the near shore environment. So the pattern that they're doesn't fluctuate throughout the day because they're likely either resting for a whole day and then being gone for multiple days. So that's what I make of these patterns based on research other people have done on their foraging behavior. So another factor that we see influencing seal abundance is tide height. So we looked at the number of seals based on the tide height at Point Reyes. And so again, these dots are the number of seals on land. We do see just a small decrease in the number of seals that are haul out when the tides get very high, so above 5 feet. So they aren't very, there's plenty of beach essentially in most of the tide cycle. When you get larger tidal fluctuations and more wave overwash, you might see a decrease in the number of seals on land because they get washed off the beach. But other than that, it's pretty available to them throughout the tide cycle. Another factor is the mouth condition. So we have found consistently that there are fewer seals on the beach when the river mouth is closed, which again happens naturally, and more seals on the beach when the river mouth is open. This is slightly confounded by the fact that we also observe more closures during the fall when seals are less abundant overall. So we have had some closures that happens less frequently in the summertime, and you might see some decrease in the number of seals, but it doesn't really prevent them from, a closure during the summer wouldn't prevent them from using the haul out in any way. I'm going to shift now to talk just generally. Question was asked about how are we doing? How are the seals doing? So this plot shows the maximum daily count of harbor seals on land for a 10-year chunk. So this is starting in 2013 and ending in the summer of 2022. And you can see kind of the seasonality in it by the shape of the bars there. But also, if we were to fit a line to it, we would notice that over time, we have seen a decrease in the number of seals on the haul out. This is not unique as far as the trend to the Jenner haul out. It's also been observed in other local areas, specifically the Point Reyes National Seashore. They put out a report on their harbor seal population annually also, and they reported a similar decrease over time. The cause for this is really unknown. It could be that they're just less abundant in this particular area. The last time that they did a statewide census count for harbor seals was back in 2012. So all of this data is after that. So it's hard to put it in context of the statewide population. Another important thing that we do to kind of report on the health of the population or the status of the harbor seals at Jenner is we report how many pups are produced each year. As you will learn as a monitor, it is not easy to count harbor seal pups. So we have a couple different ways of doing it. Harbor seals are precocial. They can swim right away, unlike other pinnipeds that share our coast. So you can't just, like if you were counting California sea lions, you can literally just like walk down the beach and everything but the pups will leave and you can count the pups. Harbor seals are not like that. So we have to count them frequently throughout the pupping season and get an idea based on number of neonates or just like the most pups we see on a particular day during the pupping season. So that's what this graph represents, how many pups we've counted over the years. The bar represents what we call, what we determine to be the highest pup count for that season each year. And it's been ranging between 30 and 50 pups pretty consistently. So even though we've seen an overall decline in harbor seal abundance, we're not seeing a decline in its use as a rookery, which is an important function. And the little triangles in the middle represent kind of an average number of pups for the season, which would, because they come and go, it's not a great representation for how many pups were produced. So we like to use that maximum number. So that's kind of generally what we've learned about the population and how, what we've seen in their abundance trends. Another important thing that we're observing is like their interactions with people. Goat Rock State Beach obviously is there for people's enjoyment. So we're balancing that, and we report how we report disturbances not just when Sonoma Water is doing an activity for our permitting requirements, but also during baseline surveys to just see what is typical for interactions between beach users and harbor seals. So again, this is the same plot of the maximum daily count of seals during this 10-year period. And then this is the total number of seals that were disturbed during any of these surveys by people. So it happens pretty frequently. People on the beach are the cause of disturbances on 62% of the baseline surveys that we see. And seals can be disturbed by changing their behavior, like moving away from the source of a disturbance, or if they feel particularly unsettled, they'll leave the beach and go into the water. And that's kind of their safe place. So that's adaptive behavior for them. Another source of disturbance that's pretty common are people in kayaks. It's, you know, they're curious and they go out there sometimes specifically to see the seals, and they can get nervous. So seals will sometimes be disturbed during those interactions as well. Anybody want to guess what the third most common source of disturbance is? You've spent any time out there?
Dogs?
Dogs. Any other guesses? Okay. Birds are actually the third most common source of disturbance. So the beach is used by a number of different species of birds also. So big flocks of gulls and pelicans and cormorants coming and going are also something that can unsettle the seals enough to have them go into the water. Dogs are on there, but they're pretty infrequent. They can cause a very marked disturbance where most of the haul out would be disturbed if they're kind of let to run up to the haul out, but it doesn't happen very frequently. I will say also that we conduct these baseline surveys during the week. So if there are specific patterns to weekend use, we wouldn't be capturing that here. So it could be that dogs are more likely to be out there with people on the weekend as opposed to during the week. But because of our plan and, you know, our staffing, we monitor during, you know, Monday through Friday. So I'll put that out there. Also, small aircraft, drones, other boats, logs, vehicle noise from the highway. Those are also observed sources of disturbance to the haul out. So I have looked at comparisons between kind of the rate of disturbance here at Jenner to other places, and it's higher than like Bolinas Lagoon because there's more access. But seals are still responding appropriately, I would say. I mean, the fact that they would flush into the water is adaptive for them. But being out there, you know, we do have the opportunity to observe anything that could lead to a more escalated response, or we would be able to see trends and seals not wanting to use the haul out after certain events. But what we've seen, to me, based on other things that I've read, seems pretty typical in terms of their interaction with the people that are also using the resources. We do monitor specifically for Sonoma Water's activities. So we look at our disturbances during our beach management or our other kind of monitoring activities. And you would expect that bringing an excavator out onto the beach would cause a disturbance all the time. And it doesn't. It's actually about 84% of those surveys. Sometimes it's because the seals are not there to begin with. And sometimes it's because the seals are hauled out far enough away from the activity that they don't completely abandon the haul out during the time that the equipment is on the beach. We do know that there is a decline in the number of seals on the beach leading up to one of these activities. And this is likely related to the fact that the mouth is closed and there tends to be fewer seals when there's a closure. And then once the mouth is then reopened after the activity, seals tend to be more abundant. So I can pause if there's any questions about the kind of summary information I presented, but I just want to quickly go over what it looks like, what to expect when you're doing a survey.
There aren't any questions in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a picture of your data sheet that you'll be using. It has kind of some basic information for the whole day on the top, and then you'll record counts of seals in the boxes and below. So you'll have to pick up equipment and then get to the overlook and then kind of get yourself oriented before you start the counts. The protocol is to count seals on land every 30 minutes for the 4-hour monitoring shift. And before we do that, we're gonna kind of fill out some beginning information, who you are, when it is, what you're monitoring for. So most of this surveys that you'll be scheduled for will be baseline surveys unless you respond to a specific request to do either a pre-breaching survey or a post-breaching survey. But if you have the date right, we can pretty much figure out what's happening. And then there's, we're looking at mouth condition. So if the mouth is open or closed, And other environmental conditions help us kind of understand what's going out there that day. So air temperature, whether it's clear, foggy, or rainy, if it's very windy. We have equipment for you that we'll go over that helps with all of that. And there's a place to, comment if there's anything special about the beach. If there's a lot of driftwood or thousands of pelicans, something like that. If there are whales out there, I always like to hear about that. And then we're gonna take a minute and scan the area to see who's out there and where they are. So I like to use binoculars for this part and scan kind of up and down the whole barrier beach area. And also just below the overlook, there's some rocks that can be out of the water that seals can rest on also. So then we're going to be looking at who, what species are out there. I'll go into what species to expect in a minute, but primarily we're looking at harbor seals. And then after that, we might see California sea lions or northern elephant seals on the beach. Those are the 3 species that we have permitted take for. There are opportunities there's potential for other species to be out there as well. And I'll go over that next, my next presentation. I like to draw a map. So you can use I think you guys have a separate data sheet or the back of the data sheet. This kind of helps me keep track of where I see seals during the summertime and during pupping. The groups can be very dispersed and there can be many of them, and it helps me to keep track by kind of outlining where they are. I use the jetty groin structure as a reference point, and that big rock we call haystack rock that's out there as another reference point. And this is also where you can make comments if there's a large group of people or if there was a disturbance and you kind of want to know where that is, you can use the map. So now we're gonna, I mentioned our environmental conditions there. So for each count, you can record beach sites separately. That's just a tool for you to keep track of things better. So if you want to count each large cluster separately, you would record then how well you can see. So the visibility, and it's on a scale of 1 to 3. If you can see very well, or if there's fog or something else obscuring your view. And we group them by age. We can't really age harbor seals after they become about a year or so old. So we have categories of pups and not pups. So that's, you need to worry about how old they are after they're not a pup. So you would start counting each group, and then we're gonna, if we have pups on the beach, we're gonna break them into 2 different age classes, which I'll describe later. And we're really only doing this March through June. It becomes too difficult to determine if it's a year-old pup or a 3-month-old pup after June when they're no longer associated with their mom. So we don't try. So you could have 3-month-old pups out there, but we're just going to group them all as one age class after the end of June. There's also a place to record other species of pinnipeds and their age class or sex as well. So California sea lions and northern elephant seals have characteristics that make an adult, you can determine whether they're male or female, unlike harbor seals. So you could record like an adult male California sea lion versus a juvenile California sea lion in here. And then for each of those 30-minute counts, you would total everything up in that total pinnipeds. So that includes all species, all age classes. And then we also want to record how many people are on the beach near that group. And I like to think of it as like close enough to have some influence on the seals. So people like way down at the parking lot, you don't need to include, but anything kind of within line of sight would be what you would want to record there. So that was kind of a very quick overview of how you would do your counts. So I mentioned that we're going to classify pups into 2 different age groups. So we want to specifically categorize neonate, which is a pup less than a week old, and any pup older than a week. So a neonate also requires special protection under our permitting, which is one reason why we want to record them separately. And also it's a way that we can count new pups each week to help get to our total pups for the year, which is another reason to count neonates separately. So a neonate is definitely going to be with its mom. It may or may not still have the umbilicus attached. That might go away within a day to 3 days. They're going to be thinner. Their hip bones are often visible. They might have visible wrinkles or folds along their abdomen. And their movements are going to be pretty weak and awkward. But like I said, they can go into the water, so they can swim. And you might observe them swimming right away. So I like to identify I don't know, one of these characteristics specifically that you can see. So the thin body shape and the folds and or the umbilicus would be what I would use to identify something as a neonate. The movements and the being with the mom are a little trickier. You might not see it move. It might be hard to determine which seal next to it is the mom. I don't know, Michelle, do you have any other tips you want to share for identifying neonates?
I think largely it's like keeping an eye on them even between counts and kind of observing the behavior of pups and like who you might think might be a neonate or might be older, like greater than 1 week. It is really difficult even for those of us that have been doing this for years. It's hard to determine, but I think observing behavior, and the umbilicus is very prominent when they're first born. So like Andy said, those are good qualities, but keeping an eye on them and kind of watching, I think throughout is a good strategy as well.
Great. Yeah, that's a good point. So even though you're counting every 30 minutes, you might notice something in your second or third or fourth count that you didn't in your first one that would change how you would identify. And so it's okay if those numbers change. So maybe you called something a pup in the first count and later you see some more characteristics and determine it as a neonate. And so include it as a neonate in the next count. So when we look at the data sheets, we would look at the highest number of neonates you counted for the day and take that value when we're looking at how many neonates were there for a given survey date. So it's okay to have that number fluctuate. Like you wouldn't want to go back and change an earlier count classification. We know that there can be conditions that kind of give you more or less information between the counts. Plus seals, we're counting seals on land, so they can go into the water. So we understand that they're going to fluctuate. So I do think it helps that kind of know how we use the data. So if you first kind of more conservatively just call something a pup and then later go, oh no, it's a neonate, then we'll capture that in how we look at the data. So as pupping season progresses, telling pups from non-pups then starts to become difficult. So a pup is going to when they're with their mom, they're going to be in close association. They'll be nuzzling, sniffling. You might see nursing. Harbor seals typically don't tolerate this with other individuals so much. So they're not really that, what do they call it? Like kenotaxic, like other pinniped species are, where they kind of like to get up all next to each other. So you'll notice even on the haul out, there'll be like space in between the seals. And if they sniff, they're kind of like, okay, but don't, like, that's enough. So if it's really a lot of contact and a lot of sniffing and nuzzling, that's going to be most likely a pup female pair. So that's how you can record that individual as a pup. Nursing obviously is going to be a big key for that. Vocalizing is another behavior that they do. Sometimes they might not actively be nursing, but you'll see them kind of hauled out like perpendicular to each other. That's something that's kind of typical. And like I said, we kind of limit the time of the year that we make these observations to increase the likelihood that we're making a good classification too. After the end of June, most pups are weaned, and they might be kind of hanging out on the beach in a group, and they could look obviously young, but we're just not going to bother with that classification after June. Another thing that can help us kind of understand what's going on out there during the survey is to take photographs. So that's part of the protocols, to take a picture of the haul out where the seals are. You can take multiple photographs if there's a disturbance or something you have a question about, and then kind of alert me that you want me to look at it. That would be great. So recording disturbances, the disturbance sheet, we record the occurrence of a disturbance event as a tally. So you will use the data sheet for each kind of species and age class. So this data sheet would be all the disturbances for harbor seal adults. If you did have pups or neonates out there and they were disturbed, you would just make a new data sheet for that age class, or different species, same thing. So based on the source of the activity, you then would record if an alert occurred, if the seals moved, or if they flushed off the haul out. So an alert is when they orient to a source of disturbance, but they haven't changed their position, they haven't moved. So this way you don't need to worry about how many, for those of you that have been with the program previously, we aren't asking you to count how many seals alerted or how many seals moved, just did it occur? And then we want to know what the source is as the best that you can describe. Yeah, so one alert activity. So even if the same kind of source caused a series of disturbance events, so pretty common situations that cause a disturbance is you'll have people walking on the beach or a photographer walking on the beach. They see the seals kind of look at them, that's an alert. The individuals stop and then start walking a little closer. Now those same seals that alerted move and then leave the haul out. So you could record that as a, first they alerted, then there was a pause, and then they flushed from the haul out. So this is how I would mark that on the tally sheet, is that there was an alert event and a flush event. And then you could write a description. And then if any other new source of disturbance, occurred, then you would just record that similarly. And they can just stack up. It doesn't have to be the same people on the beach every time you make a tally there. It can be a new group of people. It's just how many disturbance events occurred for each source. Jessica mentioned that we are asking you to look out for and report any abandoned pups. We do also want you to be looking for any injured or stranded animals and filling out a data sheet that we then report to the stranding office and National Marine Fisheries, and if appropriate, the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito. If it's a live stranded animal that could be responded to, we would reach out to them. And if it's a carcass of a stranded animal, then we might reach out to California Academy of Sciences if they want to come and do a collection of the specimen. So I would say if you believe that this animal is stranded, so stranding is very specific, and it's the Marine Mammal Center is actually limited in how they can respond if an animal is in the middle of a haul out. So you might have an animal that might be stranded or injured, and they often have difficulty getting to it if it's in the middle of the haul out. But we'll let them know and let them decide either way. You want to give as much information in these stranding and injury reports as possible, and take photographs or video as well as you can. There will be some times where you might see some very superficial scratches and marks on them, especially during the mating season. There's some like biting and clawing involved. And so you might see some superficial wounds, like the photograph in the bottom where there's just like a little bit of blood on the ear. I would not fill out an injury report for that. But the picture above where it looks like someone tried to snack on that harbor seal, I would report that as an injury. And most importantly, anything that is human caused or anything that could have been related to any kind of human activity on the beach, we would want to report that. So that could include entanglements or boat propeller injuries, those kind of things. And this all gets added to a database, and they keep track of different types of injury reports, where they're happening and what the causes are.
Andy,
So
Gary has a question about the disturbances. What is the timing for the event? Is it account for the entire 4 hours or some other timing?
Oh, so for filling out this data sheet, that would
Yeah,
be
That's
for
my
the-
question. It wasn't clear to me when you're counting people on the beach or kayaks or all that, whether you're doing that at a moment or whether it's over the
Oh.
4 hours that you're observing.
So for the data sheet, the people would be any people at that single moment for the count. So you're counting it, it's like an instantaneous census. Like at this time there were 50 seals and 3 people. And then you wait, you're making observations for disturbances during that whole period of time and adding anything that occurs to the tally sheet. And then you would only then count seals or people like in their numbers then at the next 30-minute count. Does that answer your question?
That helps with that form. Then when we got to this form, is this in the same 30 minutes or how do you
This
deal
is
with
during
this
the whole 4 hour.
during the whole 4 hours? So if people are coming and going on the beach and you got one photographer and then you got somebody that was running up with their camera because they wanted to get their selfie. Those would be 2 separate events, but you would show that the seal was alerted and then it decided to move or just flushed itself. Right. And this would be the 4 hour summary then, and you start seeing events.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So right. So we don't need so this the one just represents that there was an alert event that happened. Not how many people or how many seals. So throughout the 4 hour period, you would do your best to record any of these events. If you're counting a group of seals in one area and something happens outside of your view, we understand that you might not be able to see everything all the time. But you would be making these observations or recording any disturbance activity kind of throughout the 4-hour period, unlike the count, which you only do every 30 minutes.
Okay, this is quite helpful. Because I have been there where some of this vehicle noise kind of, somebody has a backfire or whatever, and you start to see activity, all their heads pop up.
Right. Yeah. And
Also-
sometimes you have no idea what they're responding to. Like they could all just like, what was that? And then like, so that's why we have an unknown category.
Also, Justin asked if new people like him would first be able to shadow experienced monitors to get the hang of the data sheets. And absolutely, we have a number of experienced monitors who are very comfortable mentoring new people. And you can go out with Andy for as long as you like for 4 hours on the 29th and also again in March. But there's nothing like waiting for 3 weeks and then you're out there by yourself and you're faced with your data sheets for the very first time. And all of a sudden, you just can't remember anything. And so we don't want to put you in that position, and we'll match you up with someone who's very comfortable with helping you out.
Yeah, great. I think that's worked out really well this past year, Hollis, having that mentoring. And we can also make an effort to let people know that are trying to get some guidance when we have staff from Sonoma Water that are going to be out there doing a survey too. So that would maybe add some additional opportunity. Michelle is going to be with me on the training next week to help get people oriented and kind of help go through all of that. And so she's definitely another resource for that.
And also, this is being recorded. And so I'm sending out the link as soon as it's available. And what happens is that because there are only 2 monitoring shifts per month, it may be a month or 2 before you sign up for a shift and you just don't remember half of what has been given to you today. So you can always go back and review this recording, the recording of this orientation and training here, which is very, very helpful.
Yes, that is a good resource. Okay. So I just have a couple more things to wrap up on the monitoring schedule generally. Jessica already touched on this. So we have some flexibility. I have a schedule mapped out that I'll be sending to Hollis and she'll post on the Google Drive. And then we have a date, suggested date. I think I pretty much put Tuesdays down as the date. You don't need to do the monitoring on that Tuesday. I do ask that if you're going to switch the date, you kind of check in, you send an email so I can make sure we don't have another action on the beach happening at the same time. So we want these to be baseline monitoring. So if we know we're going to have our survey crews out there doing a topographic survey on the beach, that would not be a good day to do a baseline survey. So we would want to avoid those. And I can highlight when we have those tentatively scheduled for, but sometimes those change because of crew availability. So, but anyway, there's some flexibility there, but we do want them to occur during the week, Monday through Friday, to be consistent. It's a 4-hour monitoring shift. It can happen during daylight hours. I think between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. is good. If you get later than 4 p.m., it can often be difficult to do good observations because when it is longer daylight hours, the sun is kind of right at your eyeballs after that point, and it gets to be pretty difficult to observe. Yeah, and so the period of time that we're doing this monitoring is March through October, and we have a more intensive monitoring schedule during the pupping season. So after June, we go to just twice a month. And the stewards are doing those ones. And we're only doing the other activity monitoring surveys. And then there's additional, okay, so this is the pupping season. And then there's additional requests for monitoring around any kind of beach management activity. So obviously we can't schedule those too far in advance. So that's where more opportunities come up. Because those require monitoring the day before, and the day after. So each kind of beach management event adds 2 more monitoring days to the schedule. And these are the dates we have for the field training. I think the plan is to meet at the visitor center so that there can be some instruction on getting the equipment out. And then the actual observations will take place at the Highway 1 pullout overlook just north of Jenner.
Right. Kason and Tony will be at the Visitors Center at 8:30. And
Great.
so they can show you how to get into the Visitor Center without tripping the alarm, which is always kind of scary. And then also how to access the equipment and sign it out.
Great. Yeah, Sonoma Water staff, like we have equipment at our office that we don't really use the visitor center. So I think at one point I had instructions on how to get in there, but I'm in the same boat as everybody else when it comes to that. So it'll be good for us too. Okay, so if I've answered the questions about the monitoring, I'm gonna go into the presentation for Pinniped ID.
I have a quick question. The field training, is that choose one of those dates, or we should be at both?
It's designed for you to be able to just go to one. If you felt like you needed more, you could go to both. But we would be covering the same. But I won't kick you out if you show up at both.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so who are we looking at out there? So there are there's 6 species of pinnipeds that could occur on our coast or do occur in some areas on our coast that we could see. 4 of them are from the family Odoriidae, and 2 of them are from the family Phocidae. So we're talking about the eared seals, the Odoriids, so sea lions and fur seals, and true seals are the harbor seals and northern elephant seals. So harbor seals are really the star of the show. They are the resident pinniped out there at Goat Rock State Beach. They have a very kind of cosmopolitan distribution. You can see them in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. They're, above the equator, and they can haul out in lots of different areas. So they can be in icy habitats, haul out on mudflats, on rocky shores. They're generalists in how they make their living. So they mostly forage in the near shore environment, but they eat a wide variety of prey, unlike other pinnipeds who might specialize in a couple of species. And this helps them do well in their distribution and their abundance because they aren't impacted by limitations in a particular prey source like some other species. So how we know we're looking at a harbor seal, they have the streamlined torpedo-shaped body. They can be in 2 different color phases. They can be light with dark spots and dark with light spots. A lot of the times they'll look kind of brown though. So when their coats aren't very new, it's hard to see their spots, and they can be kind of brown. Occasionally you might see one that has particular like reddish oxidized fur, and that's likely a seal that's been hanging out in San Francisco Bay and has been exposed to some metal contaminants that cause that kind of oxidation. They do show up occasionally. They do not have external ear flaps, so they have holes for their ears instead of little flaps. You commonly, when they're resting, especially if they're resting on the beach, but the beach is wet, or if they're hauled out on a rock, they adopt this C-shaped posture. You can kind of see that in the photograph on the upper right-hand side. where their tails and their noses will be kind of poking up like a banana. Males and females are about the same size, so we don't really make an attempt to identify them to sex, because males might be a little bit bigger, but not enough for us to be able to discern. So you have to get up close and personal to be able to figure that out. They're also non-migratory, so they might disperse from the area that they were born, but typically a female will return to the same breeding area to give birth year after year, and they might use multiple haul-outs within an area, but they do not migrate seasonally like some other species. Northern elephant seals are the other fosid seals that we can see out there. Males and females are very sexually dimorphic. They look very different. The adult males are much, much larger than females. They're, weight in tons, not in pounds. They have that characteristic, males have that characteristic proboscis that gives them their name, elephant seals. And even so, a female or a young animal could be confused with the harbor seal. They don't have any spotting. They have tan fur. They have very large eyes, very black whiskers, and their nails are a little bit more prominent and usually very dark black. They do this behavior that harbor seals won't do, and that's flipping sand onto their back, kind of a thermoregulatory behavior that they engage in. So if you see sand flipping on the beach, then you have an elephant seal. These animals do migrate seasonally. They actually spend most of their time out at sea, and they forage for large squid and other deep dwelling prey items. They do come to shore in the winter for their breeding and females for giving birth. And then again in the spring when they undergo a molt. All of these seals do molt their fur, but elephant seals have what they call a catastrophic molt, where it actually comes off in huge sheets. So they need to stay on shore during this period of time. So when they're on, when they come ashore, they stay ashore until they go back to sea. Unlike a harbor seal, which will come and go throughout the days. So here's some images that help distinguish harbor seals from elephant seals. Typically, we're going to see young subadult elephant seals when we do see them at Jenner. So they're not going to have those characteristic elephant seal nose or giant body that would help us figure it out. So the sand flipping, like I said, is definitely something that I've observed that's helped me identify them. They'll probably be slightly larger than a harbor seal, but it depends on the age of that elephant seal. The big black eyes are a good indicator too, and their nose is definitely more broad and kind of more flattened. So using the scope to really kind of get in there, once you see them side by side, you'll kind of be able to pull out those characteristics. The next, another commonly occurring pinniped is the California sea lion. They don't have breeding areas near us, but we will find juveniles and males. So it's not typical to find an adult female in the area because they're more restricted to their breeding grounds in Southern California and the Channel Islands and also in Baja. The males are migratory, so they will journey all the way from Alaska down to the Channel Islands because they need to be where the females are for breeding. So we do see groups of them. Sometimes they come ashore. Sometimes we just observe them in the estuary, in the water. we're only recording animals on land in the data sheet, but I do like it when if there are sea lions in the water, if you record that in the comments, so we know that they're in the area. An adult male is much larger and has a different body shape than a female. They have a barrel chest and most noticeably a big top knot, or what's called sagittal crest, on their forehead. And that helps to identify them when they're in the water and you're only seeing their head. And sometimes the fur on there can get kind of lighter in color. But a juvenile won't have those characteristics, but all of them will be able to kind of sit upright. They can rotate their hips, which harbor seals cannot do. So if you see an upright pinniped out there, it's not a harbor seal and it's not an elephant seal. And it could be a sea lion. They also have external ear flaps, and their noses are more pointy, kind of like dog, like retriever shaped, I think. Here are some photographs of sea lions taken from Jenner. So a group of young sea lions up there, taken on a rock in the estuary. I think that's around like Heron Rookery. Sometimes there's changes to the food web down south that cause groups of young animals to kind of travel further than they normally would, and we might see them up here. The other image on the left-hand side is of a young sea lion and hanging out there with the harbor seals. They typically don't spend a lot of time near each other when they are on the beach. Usually they'll be kind of off on their own, but you notice immediately that it's upright. It has a lot longer flippers. It's different color. You can see the ear flaps. And then here's a group of them on the lower right-hand side in the water. So this is these males that are migrating either to or from the breeding grounds. And they usually cause quite a stir when we get a group of males in the estuary. There's a lot of barking. If you hear barking, that's a sea lion. Harbor seals don't bark. And then splashing, and you could see them foraging too, which is kind of entertaining. Here's some comparison shots of harbor seals and sea lions in the water. Harbor seals are definitely more stealthy. They don't use their flippers for propulsion. So their body is still tucked in when they're swimming, and they kind of move their whole body to move through the water, whereas a sea lion will use their flippers for gliding, for propelling, and for angling themselves in the water. And so you can see them sometimes, like in the lower photograph there, with their big flipper kind of coming out of the water when they're swimming, or that kind of prominent forehead knot. So those are some ways to tell them apart in the water. Stellar sea lions are another eared seal that could be in the area. I've never observed one at Goat Rock State Beach, but there is a group of them that are offshore closer to Fort Ross. So they are around. They look very similar to a California sea lion, but they are larger, which is hard to tell when you don't have a California sea lion next to them. I think their faces are kind of more smushed, so I would say more bear-like than dog-like. They have typically lighter fur. Again, it's hard to tell if the animals are wet, what color their fur is. But if you're not sure, take a picture, and then we can go from there.
And Andy, Gary has a question in the chat about whether we're counting them in the ocean or only the ones on the beach.
We're only recording them when they're on the beach. But if you do hear them or see them like in the estuary, I would please add it to the comments. A couple other species include fur seals. So these are in the area. They northern fur seals they actually have a rookery on the Farallon Islands and down at San Miguel Island, although most of the population is up in Alaska and the Bering Sea. They are, fur seals for their fur. They were almost exterminated because of their luxurious coat. So that's one of their characteristics, just very thick, glossy fur. They are smaller than California sea lions or stellar sea lions. They have really pointy, it's kind of petite faces and noses. They don't have the prominent kind of forehead. And their flippers are extremely long. They are pelagic, so they spend most of their time at sea swimming about, and these flippers are what help them do that. And when they are ashore, they'll kind of wave and fan their flippers, and it's like they're wearing clown feet. They're very, very long. So that would be a good characteristic that you're not looking at a sea lion. We definitely need to report if we're seeing any kind of fur seal out there. They do appear along the Sonoma Coast, oftentimes during kind of a stranding event. Although healthy individuals can just come ashore and rest because they need a breather. But we, don't have any permitted take to disturb them. So if they were on the beach, that would kind of halt any of our activities. So it's important to know if they're in the area. Plus, we would just want to check in with the Marine Mammal Center and the stranding coordinators to let them know, since they're uncommon to us. Another species of fur seal, which is a very, very small population that's almost exclusively in Southern California and off the coast of Baja, but have been observed here during stranding events, as the Guadalupe fur seal. They look very similar to a northern fur seal. So definitely, if you see anything that looks like a fur seal, take a picture as best you can and let us know as soon as possible. Because there are certain characteristics you can use to help distinguish them. But you have to get a really, really close up. A young pup Guadalupe fur seal could be confused with the California sea lion pup too. So it's, like I said, it's always good to get a picture. One thing that does separate them is kind of how the fur pattern on their foreflipper is. A northern fur seal, the fur line kind of at the elbow is straight across, and a Guadalupe fur seal, it comes down into a V. So that would be kind of my distinguishing characteristic for those two species of fur seal. But fur seals are pretty rare, and it would be exciting news if you saw one. So, like I said, when in doubt, take a photograph. Here's an example of some photographs I took through the scope to kind of help. So on the left-hand side, we have what just looks like a pinniped. It ended up being a California sea lion that's kind of skinny and not doing so hot. So we made a stranding report of this guy, but not really giving us any of the characteristics. We can't see its face. It's not sitting upright. So they can be tricky like that. So if you have something you're not quite sure what it is, just keep checking in, keep looking back. Usually their behavior will help you identify them. And on the right-hand side, closer to that log, we have a sneaky little juvenile elephant seal, but it has been flipping sand, and you can see kind of the sand around it and the sand on its back. Other than that, it wouldn't have been very remarkably different from one of the harbor seals out there with kind of a brown coat. So always good to keep those things in mind. We already talked a bit about the pups. So we'll start seeing pups. These are harbor seal pups. We wouldn't expect to see any other species of pup out there. Starting in March, typically, we sometimes see premature births prior to March. Those, unfortunately, they tend not to survive. They need all the time that they have to be successful at birth. They'll stay with their moms for about 30 days. They get some very high quality, high fat content milk that causes them to grow really quickly prior to weaning. And like I said, they can swim at birth, so that can be tricky too, but it is pretty pretty cute when you get to see them hitching a ride from their mom, like in this picture here. Here's another couple different examples of a neonate versus a pup. So we had an example of them sitting right next to each other. So we can see the one identified as a neonate on the left still has the umbilicus. And if you squint, you can kind of see the folds and that prominent hip bone. And that hip bone is what lets me know that it hasn't really had much time to feed and it hasn't really gained much in terms of body fat. Unlike the pup, that's looking quite a bit more plump to the right. No hip bones visible, no folds in the skin. We're like a very overinflated football at this point. So I have a little quiz to end us with today. So here are 4 pictures of moms and pups. So we already know they're pups. So the quiz is which ones are pictures of neonates and which ones are pups, which could be, I don't know, it's just a pup, or I know it's older than 1 week old, and why. Anybody want to pick out is there anyone who thinks they know at least one of them that's definitely a neonate?
You can unmute yourselves and
Yeah,
just
just
call
jump
out.
on in.
I think A and D are neonates.
Okay, and why do you think they are neonates?
So A, you can see that prominent hip bone on the rear, and it's very wrinkled. And then D is just very wrinkled.
Mm-hmm. Good. Anyone else want to jump in?
I was struggling with C.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, I agree.
it's like it's missing.
With C, you can't tell. So that's my example that's in there because you would call it a pup because we know that's the most general category. So it's definitely a pup. And so if we have ones that we can't tell if it's a neonate pup or a pup older than 1 week, we just call it a pup. So good job.
So a question for C, is it
Mhm.
in the ocean or is it on land?
So I'm glad you brought that up. Sometimes when the seals are hauled out, they're on wet land and we still count them. So I kind of look at their behavior. If they're not swimming, then I will count them as being hauled out because they could be like right at the edge of the water or on a rock that's mostly covered in water, but they're like in that C-shaped posture. So yeah. And this is pretty typical. They get very impatient if they've been out swimming and the pup wants to nurse right away and they hardly let their mom get up on the beach before they start harassing her. So you'll see that quite a bit. Okay. What do we know about the seals in photo B? So this one I put in there because like they're in that perpendicular shape. So that's like, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm looking at a mom and a pup, even though that pup is just about as big as its mom. And that will happen as you get toward the end of weaning or the end of the nursing period before they're weaned. They grow like really big, really fast, and the moms get smaller as this time goes on, right? So it's the transfer of those resources there. So it's their orientation to each other, the fact that the mom is kind of tolerating having another seal like right there at her belly. And one also has a really new coat. So at this time of year when pups are on the beach, the animals that have been around for a year or two, their coat's about a year old now, and it's starting to be brown and kind of worn out. And the animals that have just been born a couple months ago will have very new shiny coats. So that helps me identify the animal in B as a pup. So good job, everyone. Another thing about D is you might notice that the female has blood on her rump. So that neonate in D, just born. So that's another sign that you're looking at a neonate, is if there's evidence on the female that she just gave birth. Okay, great work, everyone. That wraps it up for me. Do I have more questions?
Well, if there are no more questions, and feel free, for me, questions always occur to me afterwards. So feel free to send an email and we can harass Jessica and Andy to respond to you if
Sure.
these come up afterwards, or you can talk to Andy next week on the 29th when if you attend, a live training. I just want to say that there are two ways that you can volunteer. You can volunteer as a state parks volunteer, and there is a paperwork and a duty statement involved in that. And if you're not already a state parks volunteer, that can certainly help you negotiate the 9 pages, as Justin pointed out earlier, and the duty statement, and get you set up as a state parks volunteer. In that case, you report your time, monitoring and also training. This counts as training time. And if you attend next week or on the 21st, that's also training time. So be sure to keep track of it. You report those hours to state parks, and that time goes towards earning a state parks parking pass for next year. And although most of the sites along the Sonoma Coast are not fee-based sites, Armstrong Woods is, and this covers also the coastal parks in the Mendocino district, many of whom have a parking fee. So it's a nice return for your efforts. You can also participate as a stewards volunteer, and Bet can also help you with that, and report your time for a stipend that is provided to you. It's part of our contract with Sonoma Water. And so those two choices are open to you. And Bet, who I believe she's on, she has taken over for Justin. Is that right, Bet? Are you here? Well, maybe not. But
Well, I am Hollis. I'm sorry, I had to unmute myself.
oh, okay. Okay.
Hello,
So
everyone.
So Bet can help you in either situation. I'm going to be sending out an email as soon as I get the link to the recording, so that you and others that registered but are unable to attend today can view the recording online. As I said before, if you're registered and you want to volunteer, but maybe you're not available until later on in March or April, and you can always refer to this recording. You can always go back for a review for anything that's unclear about the data forms or anything else before going out on your own for the first time. And we don't send you out on your own. We'll match you up with others that have experience and can help you. Also, there was a question about our pictures going to be in the package when we get to the visitor center, so we aren't recalling seals by memory. And I'm not sure, I don't remember what's in the package per se, but if not, we'll provide those resources for you.
We should have some, I think, Hollis.
Yeah.
I've provided them in the past, so it would be good to check that they're still there, but we have some like of the image drawings that were in there, and also some other resources on identifying them. So no, you wouldn't be required to remember.
And I remember the line drawings specifically, but we want to make sure that they're still there for you.
Yeah.
One other thing that I wanted to mention is that Phil Warren of the Marine Mammal Center did a wonderful presentation for us annually, actually, on what the Marine Mammal Center does and when to contact them if you suspect that an animal has been abandoned or is in trouble. And so in the follow-up email I'm sending out, I'll also send you a link to the recording that Phil did on the Marine Mammal Center, and it just might be of interest to you because of all the fabulous things that they do. So are there any other questions? Hi, Leslie.
Sometimes I take pictures with my cell phone. How do I get those pictures to Andrea or whoever is responsible?
Andy?
So I think now you have to help me, Hollis. Does Annie take them off or is that you who takes them off the when they are on our camera and then loads them
Yeah.
to the Google Drive?
Annie takes them.
If Leslie could like email them to whoever is
Annie?
responsible for putting them on Annie.
Yeah.
And on the Google Drive. Yeah.
And Leslie, we'll double check with Annie about that.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah. And if there's something that you specifically want me to see, that's because there's a question about what's out there, then you could send them directly to me. And that could be for anyone. When the pictures get taken just as part of the survey protocol and either on like on the cameras that we provide, they go onto a Google Drive and then I can view them from there, but I might not see them for a month because that's kind of the cycle that we have for uploading monitoring data. So if it's something that we should look at before that period, then maybe just send it directly to me.
Andy, your email address is provided on the data sheet, right?
Okay, that's what I'm.
Yeah.
So are there any other questions? Well, thank you so much for participating today. And I hope it's something that you're interested in doing. It's more of a solitary activity than Seal Watch, where you're out there with a couple of other people. You'll start off with somebody, but then you're out there on your own for 4 hours. But some of us like that. It's, you know, it's a wonderful way to spend 4 hours of your day. It's an incredible sight. There's a lot of other things going on as well that are enjoyable. And you're contributing data that really helps Sonoma Water in their monitoring and their management activities. So you're doing something important at the same time. Anything else? Okay, we look forward to seeing you on the 29th.
Yeah, thanks everyone who took the
Thank you
time
all.
to join us today.
Thank you.
Thanks
See
everyone
you
for your
soon.
interest.
See you soon.
Bye.
See you next
Thank
week.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hollis. Bye.
Bye.